Welcome to a new show, another show of Eating Labels. I have our sports strength conditioning insider, Mitch Sadowsky, to talk to us today about strength and conditioning. Usually on Eating Labels, we talk about, food preparation, what to be aware of, changing our eating habits. But as we know, in the world of eating, you just can't do that alone. We're both former athletes, or actually rivals, played volleyball in college against each other. He went to Ball State, boo. I went to IPFW, Indiana, Purdue at Fort Wayne. And we're rivals, and we became good friends over the years. And we both still coach volleyball. We're involved. But Mitch Sadowsky has went on the other side, too, also on the strength and conditioning side of the deal, and want to get his expertise on some things. So, Mitch, if you can introduce yourself, tell us what you're up to, and tell us what you do for athletes.
Yeah. Well, my name is Mitch Sadowsky. Like I said, like Craig said, we were cross the net rivals in college, and after I finished up school, was coaching in college for a couple schools, and then always stayed pretty close to the strength training side. I was very fortunate to have some really good mentors at Ball State, and I noticed while I was coaching college that we would get kids in that were good volleyball players, but we started noticing that we'd get more and more rashes of injuries, or that we would get kids in that weren't physically prepared for the rigors of the collegiate game. So I got out of college coaching in 2007, moved to Orlando, and started a strength training business. Shortly after that, was hired as the
What's the name of your strength training business?
I own MItchell Strength and Performance. As a part of that, I'm also the director of golf fitness at Lake Nona Golf and Country Club. So right as I was transitioning over to the strength training world, been involved with club coaching and strength training volleyball players as well, but got into training golfers. Worked with a number of professional golfers on different tours, mainly work with volleyball and volleyball athletes and golfers, some baseball players, but just athletes. And I just got into doing that and really, really enjoy it. I'm never too far away from coaching. I think that's always going to be in my blood, but just really love the strength training side of sports. I know I'm very fortunate to be 43 and never have had a major injury, which I don't attribute to good genes at all. I had to bust my butt in the weight room in college just to try to keep up with everybody. Wasn't the most talented, wasn't the most athletic, but had to work my butt off. So I probably spent more time in the weight room in college than I did anything else. And when you sit behind an All-American, you're just really going to have to find something to keep you busy. So,
Exactly.
So that's kind of how I got here.
Okay, cool. Let's jump right into it. I remember when we first trained back in the early 90s, when we were in school, we were literally sweating before we actually took the court. So there was a little bit more preparation leading up, which we call the warm-up, warming our muscles up to get ready to go. Nowadays, you walk into a gym, it doesn't matter what it is, kids kind of do a little something and then they're off playing. Okay, so is there a difference between static and dynamic stretching? How should one warm up?
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good question. I think with anything, it's important to have a system. No matter what that system is, have a system. So I don't want to say that one is better than the other. It depends on what you're doing. If static stretching alone is what you're doing to prepare for competition, I think you're missing a few elements. Mm-hmm. You're not really doing much. I know there's I think it's a bit of a psychosomatic effect where I think just because you can see my upper body, like doing the cross body stretch and the upper body stretch, I think that it feels like something's getting loose, but you're really not doing anything to the muscle fibers. With any type of a warm-up, you want to make sure that you're increasing blood flow, you're increasing body temperature, and that you are preparing the body to move.
Okay.
In terms of mobility, I'm not a huge proponent of increasing mobility before your training, whether that's skill specific, whether you're going to practice volleyball, golf, whatever it is, because you're going to start to get into end ranges that your body's not comfortable in, so you're not really going to get any benefit out of that. Mobility should be its own training, whether it's after your strength training workout or after your sport workout.
And when you say mobility, what do you mean by mobility?
So what I'm talking about mobility is actually increasing range of motion. Okay. So if you have, say, 20 degrees of internal hip rotation, you don't want to go out and try to get 30 degrees and then as part of your warm up and then go lift, because your body just doesn't know how to control that new end range.
Okay.
There's certainly a time and place for it, but before competition, before practice, before lifting is probably not the best time. In terms of dynamic stretching, now we're talking about increasing tissue temperature, increasing blood flow, increasing heart rate. So that I think is a more appropriate form of warm up, because now you're actually preparing your body to move. Okay. So I think a system that's really good, Mike Boyle introduced, you can foam roll, static stretch, then dynamic move. Or you can foam roll, then static, then dynamic. Or you can just foam roll. For me, I'll foam roll, I'll do a dynamic stretch, and then I'm in my training. So I think the other part of warm up too is it should be germane to what you're about to do. If you're deadlifting that day, you should probably be doing some type of warm up that includes warming up your hamstrings, getting your glutes activated, doing some hinges, glute bridges, things like that. If you're squatting, you should certainly be warming up your hips. You should be getting some hip flexor movement. You should be getting some rotation. Any type of core movement or core stability is going to be good if you're doing an upper body. I think crawling is good. Shoulder range of motion, shoulder stability. Everything should be appropriate to what your activity is that day. So, I think for a lot of my volleyball athletes, we'll do a number of different compound dynamic stretches, and then we'll go into some skipping, we'll go into crawling, we'll use mini bands for glute activation, and then, our warm-ups will mimic or at least reflect what we're going to be focusing on that day.
Okay. Now, Mitch, quick, are you still there? You froze up on that. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
Okay, cool. I'm having a little bit of internet issues, but we'll plug through it. Now,
all good.
Question for you.
Yeah.
Say you're going into a volleyball practice and you're warming, you're ready to warm your team up.
Yep.
How long should that warm up be?
I think everybody is different. I think if you and I were to try to warm up versus our high school kids, I think it's a little bit longer.
That's true.
I think it's enough to, they should be sweating pretty good. I'm a little bit different in my warm up with my volleyball teams when I'm coaching. We'll do world's greatest stretch. We'll do some side lunges. We'll do single leg deadlifts. We'll do glute bridges. We'll do bird dogs, inchworms. So, we've got we still have a lot of the same principles going in. As soon as we get done with our dynamic stretching, though, we do have a skill-specific warm-up where we start getting into more volleyball-specific movement patterns. So we have 3 types of shuffle footwork, or 3 types of passing and pass-to-attack footwork with our outside hitters. So we'll have them actually go through their movements. So they'll practice their footwork for pass to attack, For a higher pass, it would be a pass and a shuffle 3 to attack. If they don't pass, they have a pass shuffle 5 or no pass shuffle 5 to attack. Then they're going to do their transition footwork. They'll do some blocking footwork and blocking moves. And while they're doing this, they're ramping up the intensity of it. And the same thing goes position by position. So our setters will work on their footwork. Our middle blockers will work on their blocking and transition and attack footwork. Our defensive specialists will be going through their floor movements. So now we're starting to get in a little bit more skill work, which I think helps reinforce a lot of our movement patterns, but also saves time in practice where I'm having to not have to worry too much about small technical instruction. We've already taken care of it in a warm-up.
Okay, makes sense. Now you said something very important, which is almost like an old school term where you said you want to sweat before you actually go into your actual practice, something we learned back in the day, and that's most of our coaches got us to that point. Now, a question for you, and that's going to lead us into the injury part. Let's say athletes are going into their regular practice, not as warm, not sweating. Could that lead to injury? And if so, what's your take on that?
That's a really hard question to ask, or at least to answer, because there's so many factors that go into injury. I think when you're looking at your soft tissue injuries, I think an improper warm-up can be a part of it. I think when you're looking at joint injuries, it's a little bit more complicated, which, we'll kind of save that for later on in this discussion. But I think from a warm-up perspective, you should be sweating, but you shouldn't necessarily be worn out, tired. I know some people the thing that kind of drives me nuts is, we'll see kids get right into the gym, and the first thing they're doing is they're tossing and hitting to each other when, I think there need to be some more appropriate warm-up before you start impacting shoulders, especially when you start looking at high school kids. A lot of them are still growing. You've got a lot of joint instability, and all of a sudden you're adding dynamic and impact implications into what can be a very vulnerable joint and a very vulnerable position. So I'd like to see kids do a little bit more position-specific warm-ups and a lot less, warm up your shoulder. Shoulders should already be warm. By the time you're done with your warm-up, I think for arm swing work for volleyball, I think that you can do the toss and attack, but to warm up the shoulder. But man, by the time you even grab a volleyball, you should be ready to get out and get after it based on your warm up.
Okay, good. Now, another question for you. It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, from the 70s, 80s, 90s to the 2000s into 2018. Are you seeing more?
Sorry, my dogs are making themselves known here.
They're like this. Hey guys, on the phone.
Yeah, they heard something outside, and it's Armageddon. We're under attack.
Don't even worry about it. Now, do you see more injuries today than there were back in the day?
I don't know. That's a tough question to ask. I think it's very similar. Hang on for a second. Let me talk about it.
Yeah, you're fine.
Hey. Bye. We're good. That's a tough question to ask whether we're seeing more injuries. When you look at, participation rates are up, so the more people that are playing, the more people could be getting injured. Maybe we're just better at diagnosing injuries. Before, someone just had a sore shoulder and you rubbed a little icy hot on that thing and you got back out there. Now any tweak of pain, someone's going to a trainer. So it's very difficult, to really say are more people getting hurt.
Okay.
If you're looking at injury rates per 1,000, I think everything's probably still a little bit steadier. I would, I would say for younger ages, when you look into other sports, baseball, certainly shoulder and elbow injuries are up.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there are just more opportunities to play for one individual. There are a lot of other factors that go into that as well. But
Okay.
I think that there's always going to be the risk of injury.
Mm-hmm.
I've really gone away from saying, our training is geared towards injury prevention. I think it's more injury mitigation and resiliency.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think any time that you have the advances in medicine that we have, we're probably just better at diagnosing injuries. I don't know if there are any more or any fewer. So
That makes sense. Now, what are common injuries in volleyball that you see?
how long do we have? The one thing that really I don't know, scare is the right word, but the one thing that certainly has me opening eyes is the lack of soft tissue versus joint injuries.
Now, when you say soft tissue, what does that mean?
Yeah, muscle pulls, muscle strains. I think we all used to see a little bit more muscular injuries, so those types of soft tissue injuries versus, I think we still see a fair amount of shoulder and knee injuries. Obviously sprained ankles because it's a sport played mainly off the floor.
Mm-hmm.
I see with a lot of my athletes, I'll see knee pain, a lot of anterior knee pain, not as much medial. So in front, not to the sides. We'll see a lot of shoulder injuries. I want to, for people that are watching this, I want to get away from the idea of tendonitis. I think it's a tendinopathy or tendinosis. I'm not a PT, but based on everybody that we've talked to, there's a mechanism that's impacting a joint, and we tend to treat the joint more than we treat the mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen alleviations of symptoms in shoulders just by fixing somebody's opposite hip. Looking at the body as a whole, we do see a lot of shoulder injuries. I'll see some elbow.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly it's one of the big four, which is right hip, left hip, left shoulder, right shoulder, and certainly knees and ankles. So.
Now, what is causing the shoulder injury? I have my separate take. Like I walk in the gym, Mitch, and I see a lot of the girls using their arm only. They're not using any rotation in their hips. I'm not an expert like you, but
you're right. I think part of it is mechanics. I think from a strength coach, we've seen a lot of advances in science and in what we know, but the principles of strength training all remain the same.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, I think we've seen a lot more advances in biomechanics,
Mm-hmm.
but I haven't seen enough of a biomechanic change in how we're teaching our kids, especially dynamic movements. I'm not a huge fan of jumping mechanics the way it's being taught. It's still being taught the way it was in the 60s and 70s. And, same thing with shoulder mechanics. There have been some really good articles. The one that jumps off the top of my head right now is Greg D. Down in Australia, who's he's got a PT strength training background. He's another strong first kettlebell instructor. He does stuff with FMS, movement screens, and volleyball. Rhett Larson, who's worked all over the world with national teams. They seem to be staying ahead of the curve. But I think the curve's just lacking. I think we teach a lot of principles that aren't biomechanically sound that may have made sense or according to what we knew in the 70s, I think was correct. But what we've learned now is just incorrect in terms of jumping and loading and arm swing mechanics. And yeah, I do. I see a lot of shoulder mechanics that just don't follow any biomechanic basis. So it's something that I would like to see sort of catch up to where we are.
Yeah, okay. Look, if volleyball players are watching right now, because the youth volleyball is very huge, and you do see a lot of ice on the shoulders when you walk around the gym. If someone is watching right now, what would you tell them they can do on a weekly basis to protect their shoulder?
I mean, for younger kids, for teenagers, high school, just start crawling. Like, I know it seems silly, but bear crawls, inchworms, any type of ground-based quadruped movement is immediately going to get your core working. It's going to get your shoulders to stabilize. That's my first thing. There's a thread the other day in Facebook that a coach put. Somebody was asking about shoulder pain or shoulder strength for a 12-year-old, and all of a sudden there's a flood of like a PT gave us these exercises, the internal external rotation and the empty cans, and all the what I would call classic shoulder rehab, when it's probably not even a cuff problem. I mean, those are fine, but the rotator cuff is a stabilization mechanism. It's not a prime mover. So we have to start looking at what muscles are supposed to be used for. Mm-hmm. So my go-to is if somebody's having shoulder issues, one, suss out why, like figure out the mechanism that's causing it. And I think one of the big things for kids is get off your darn cell phones. I mean, if you think about it, when you are here all day long, your shoulders are rolled forward, your head's popped forward. It puts a lot of stress on the posterior side of the neck, and your shoulders close off in front, and your head's down here, which shuts off your core. So one is trying to correct, and I don't want to say correct posture, but the injury mechanism is, can joints get into position to absorb and adapt to stress? If you're not in an optimal position, then no, your body cannot absorb and adapt to those stresses. So getting kids back onto the ground will help get rid of some of those postural issues, and it's also going to fire up their CNS, their central nervous system, to start receiving a little bit more information, teach them how to stabilize a little bit more. And I mean, I think for me, that's the big thing. So crawling, and then obviously, for me, loaded heavy carries.
So actual.
Yeah, just crawl on the ground, whether it's a baby crawl, a bear crawl, an inchworm, a crab. I mean, any of those things are going to be great for shoulder stability. And then I love doing loaded carries. Every one of my athletes, every single day, does some type of loaded carry.
What are loaded
carries? So loaded carry, I mean,
as we get going, I'm new to this technology.
Yeah.
There's a way we can have pictures on here, so I'm going to get pictures, so don't worry. So
cool.
People can kind of see what you're talking about.
Yeah.
We'll have some visual with it, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so farmer carries, pick up 2 weights, carry them around like a farmer carrying 2 bales of hay or 2 big old milk jugs. Okay. Suitcase carries, single arm carry, great for asymmetric work, great for anti-rotation. If you have access to a kettlebell, a rack carry, which is sitting in the rack position here, and if you have the overhead position, a little bit lighter weight, but getting up overhead and carrying that weight overhead are all great for shoulder stability and shoulder strength. Usually, I mean, I found that athletes who develop shoulder pain, especially for volleyball, just don't have any type of overhead stability. In fact, they just lack shoulder stability in general. So now you're asking their shoulder to stabilize itself through impact of a volleyball, and the shoulder just can't hold up to it. So it's gonna be fine for a while, and then their shoulder is gonna give you some type of pain response that says, "Hey, stop whatever it is that you're doing that's aggravating the shoulder, and get it fixed." It doesn't mean play through pain. It doesn't mean that, throw a little ice on it, and, ice is good. It has its place. But if you're using ice to get through a practice, I think you're missing a huge red flag that your body's sending to you.
Okay. So if the athlete out there, youth volleyball, if they're having shoulder injuries, they have to identify So help identify what's going on with that shoulder, strengthen it by doing, you can do some bell crawls or just getting back on the ground, doing different things and load and carry, like you just said.
Yeah.
Some good stuff. I never heard that before, Mitch. And I tell you what, there's something I'm going to start implementing, not only with my players, but with myself too also.
Yeah. It's funny. So my brother-in-law is a power lifter. He's highly ranked in the state of Arizona. He can deadlift over 700 pounds. He can back squat 635. And so we're talking about some things that we can add or subtract to his training. We actually added in heavy farmer carries in place of some of his deadlifts, just to save his body a little bit, but work on his grip, work on his work capacity. And it's been a huge part of his training that helped him win a couple of meets. You can ask any of my high school kids that we work with. We carry every single day, and a lot of it is for shoulder health, but it can give us a really good training effect without wearing their bodies down too much.
Okay. Now, last question I'm going to ask you, Mitch, some good information for athletes in general that have shoulder injuries, especially in the volleyball world.
Yeah.
Rest.
Yeah.
Okay. Me personally, I'm a big component of rest, but in today's sporting world, whether it's basketball, football, volleyball, you see kids going all year round, and they go from club, whatever it is, to camps, to high school, more camps, and then the cycle continues. What's your philosophy on resting?
I'm really passionate about this, so I'm going to really try hard not to swear. Kids need to rest more. They play way too much. Way too much. Like kids need to take time off. Parents always ask me, what's the best camp for my kid to go to? And it's the one that doesn't take as much time, to be really honest. And it's no offense to all my friends that run camps and, run their college camps, but you look at the top players, and my top kids in my high school, I mean, they were getting done with their club season in beginning of July. They'll probably play, go through one or two camps. And, by that time it's mid to late July, they take a 10-day family vacation. Now we're at tryouts. Or they're, trying to squeeze one or two more camps in, and, they think that a week is, they think taking a week off is enough. It's not even close. Like kids that age probably need about 2 months off per year, maybe 3.
Wow.
James Andrews talks a lot about this. Recovery is such an important part of an athlete's recovery. And, part of that is injury mitigation. Can joints adapt to stress and get in a position to absorb load? And, if you're tired, then no. Your body doesn't know how to stabilize itself. It's just tired. So getting kids to rest a little bit more. I really wish that club wouldn't start until January. Most high schools, their season ends mid to late October. They're playing in state. We get into mid-November, and then all of a sudden they've got club tryouts and they got weekend club stuff. Or, gosh, even worse, you got kids that are taking individual private lessons during the high school season, and to get ready for club stuff. And at some point, everyone's got to understand that more isn't better. More is just more. And it's not, what's the difference between 50 reps and 100 reps? I'd rather have 100 reps spread out over a series of time rather than trying to crush it into one weekend. It's not, your kid's not going to get any better doing that. They're too tired. You can't learn when you're tired. So, I just wish that there was more time. I mean, ideally for me, if I were to make a club schedule, or at least a season schedule for one of my high school players, as soon as they get done, at the end of their high school season, they would immediately take 2 months off. They'd have all of November, all of December. They would get a movement screen either an FMS and an SFMA, which is functional movement screen, or the selective functional movement assessment. They would get a movement screen. They'd identify some of their deficiencies. They would get on a good progressive strength training program. I don't know about conditioning at that point. For men, probably start up practices maybe late December, but certainly no jumping and no hitting. And then start play up in January. They'd go January through June, and they would have at least July off. No camps, no nothing.
Okay.
That would be my ideal schedule.
And
That way, 3 months off. They're not playing any more than 6 months. So that's kind of if I had my druthers, that's kind of what the season
awesome.
The season would look like. So
this will be our last question, running out of time a little bit. Now, with that said, Mitch, I'm a big component of what you just said. I've been preaching that for years, okay? Rest. What can that lead to so the athletes can hear, okay, by you're stretching your body out, overloading all these activities, not taking time off, what can that ultimately lead to with no rest? Little to no rest.
Well, a lot. One, hormonal imbalances. Right now with males, we see a drop in testosterone as you age, but a lot of that is a cortisol imbalance. You don't get good sleep, or you don't get enough sleep. We see this with a lot of people who are heavily engaged in a lot of metabolic type fitness activities. Is their cortisol's off, they don't get good sleep, your testosterone production drops, they're immediately at risk for injury. With females, it can affect the menstrual cycle. It can affect, a lot of different things. When your body's tired, it doesn't want to do anything. It just wants to recover. Usually what I tell all my athletes or people who come to me for fitness and training advice, first thing I tell them is 1, sleep better. 2, drink more water. 3, eat more green vegetables. And 4, go for walks. If you can do those things, your recovery will be much, much better. And I guess as part of those, get rid of your phone every once in a while. Feel free to interact with your friends face to face or via chat.
Right.
Spider and I are. I think to jump back, one of the questions that you had sent me, which this goes back into the recovery aspect and athletes being tired, is you're seeing a rash of ACL and MCL type injuries, especially in female athletes. And there are a number of different considerations that we have to have in that. One is certainly the type of rest they're getting. We have to look at different environmental stresses as well. So if they're not getting good sleep because they're overloaded with homework, there's probably, for teenagers, there's developing relationship stress. The menstrual cycle is certainly a huge factor. I can't remember the study, but there have been several of them, and they found more than a preponderance of evidence that females are more susceptible to ACL injuries within 1 or 2 days of getting their menstrual cycle and getting their period. So, that's something else to take into consideration. When you're pushing your athletes as a coach, and I've got a very good relationship with my female athletes, and they're very comfortable coming up to me and saying, "Hey, coach, I got my period today." It's a little bit odd to develop that and tell them like this, but once you tell them the reasons why, they start to understand a little bit. So one, there's obviously a hormonal effect. 2 is I'd love to see athletes be barefoot more often. The better their feet move, the better their ankles are going to move. The better their ankles move, the better their hips move. The better the hips move, the better their knees are going to be able to adapt and absorb to different stress. Ankles that don't move well usually result in hips that don't move well. So when you get knocked off balance, if your hips are unstable, because they don't have the range of motion or the strength that they need. There's one place that is going to really try to absorb that stress, which happens to be the weakest link, which is the knee. So you see a lot of kids who, land on one knee and that knee buckles. And that's where the ACL and MCL injuries come into play. But I look at everything that led up to that. So maybe they've got a history of ankle injuries. Maybe they're using some type of ankle immobilization. There's hard plastic ankle braces. I'm not a very big fan of those. They may prevent injuries, but there are a lot of other implications that can affect how the rest of the body moves. So I really prefer some type of soft brace that allows the ankle to move, that will lessen the severity of those. But it also goes back into, training your ankles. I mean, you can certainly train ankles to move better and to be stronger, which means when you roll your ankle, your body's going to be able to adapt and absorb that stress without firing up the injury mechanism. The old inversion eversion ankle stretches where you kind of lean on one edge and you roll your ankle out and stretch it. You should be able to do that to quite a degree, and most people lack that ability. So if you get into that motion, let's say you either land off balance or you land on somebody's foot and you roll it, that injury is going to be a lot more severe because the tissues can't get into the position that they're being forced into. So taking all of those things, in strength training, we call it the joint by joint approach, is making sure all the stable joints are stable, making sure all the mobile joints are mobile, and making sure they're being strength trained in those ranges so that when you're asked to get into that range, you can go there. So to circle back around, tired joints don't want to adapt to those stresses. So making sure that you have that recovery. You're certainly looking at wear and tear and mileage on certain joints during the season. Are all very important, and obviously sleep, hydration, and nutrition are all very important to that.
Good. That's good information, Mitch. And we're just about out of time. Well, thank you for joining me. And
yeah, man.
Getting this information out to the people, because I feel it's important information. You're on that other side now. And as coaches, we don't have that time to, say, hey, you need to do this, you need to do that. We need somebody like you to give us that information. So with that said, how can people get a hold of you?
Facebook, Mitchell Evans Strength. On the Instagram and the Twitter, we've got @Mitch Sadowsky, SADOWSKY, MitchellEvansStrength.com, and
email. You want to give your email?
Oh, yeah. Email is MitchellEvansStrength@gmail.com. And I think those are the best ways to do it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. And then what I'm going to do also, Mitch, is going to be at the bottom of YouTube when I upload it. So I'm going to have all that information. I'm going to have your bio and how people can get a hold of you. So, man, appreciate it. I'm looking forward to doing this once a month so we can hit on some good topics and you can give people good information that they can take with them and start implementing immediately. So I appreciate it, my man.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me on, Spider. Look forward to doing it.
All right, bud.